Ever stop to think about, like, the connection between autism and epilepsy? It's something you hear about but don't really, think about that often. But it's more common than you'd expect. We're doing a deep dive today on exactly that. We've got this article from Cheap ABA. It's called Autism and Epilepsy, a Complex Relationship. And just so you know, they're all about ABA therapy, but this article is actually a good overview of, like, the general connection. So, first thought, you'd think autism and epilepsy are, like, totally different, right? One's about how you interact, communication, all that. The other's seizures. Totally different worlds.
Yeah, it's a really common misconception. People see them as separate things, but there's a huge overlap that's super interesting.
This article kind of blew my mind a bit. It says, if you've got autism, you're way more likely to have epilepsy too. Like, not just a bit more. It's 25, 30% more than everyone else.
It's a big jump, and it tells us something's definitely going on. This isn't just random. There are things connecting them.
So that's the what, but the why is the big question for me.
Right.
The article talks about a few reasons. First up, genetics. Seems both can be affected by your genes. Makes sense. If you can inherit one, why not genes that make you more likely to have both? It's like predisposition, kind of how some families have, like, allergy problems.
Exactly. It's like a blueprint. And researchers are studying those shared genes like crazy because figuring them out could change how we diagnose and treat both.
Then there's the whole brain thing. The article talks about how brain structure and function are different in autism, and that could lead to seizures more easily. One thing leads to another, biologically.
Right. And the brain is so complex, even a tiny difference in how it's wired can have huge effects, especially on things like electrical activity, which is what seizures are.
And on top of that, other conditions can be involved, like the article mentioned intellectual disabilities, more common in people with autism, and also linked to higher epilepsy risk.
Shows you can't just look at one thing, you got to see the whole picture, how everything interacts.
Makes sense when you put it like that. But speaking of complicated, it gets even more interesting when you think about the seizures themselves. Most people, when they hear seizure, they think of that one thing, right? Like falling down, shaking, the whole dramatic thing.
Yeah, like the movies always show.
Exactly. But the article made me realize there are all sorts of seizures. Some are so subtle, you might not even know it's happening.
And that's a big deal, especially with autism. If someone's already having trouble communicating, how do they explain a seizure that's not obvious?
Okay, so walk us through it. What are these different kinds? The article mentioned absent seizures, sometimes called petit mal. Heard the term, no idea what it means.
Picture this. Someone just zones out for a few seconds. Might stare, maybe their eyes flutter, then they snap back like nothing. Classic absence seizure.
So super brief, easy to miss.
Totally. Now imagine that happening to a kid who's already got their own world, right? Or hates eye contact anyway. You could miss it so easily.
Wow. Yeah, it makes you realize how important it is to know this stuff. What else is there? The article listed a bunch. Atonic, or drop seizures, clonic, myoclonic, even conic. And those are just the names. I have no clue what they mean.
All right, let's break them down. Atonic, it literally means without tone, so muscle tone. Like a puppet with its strings cut, sudden collapse, hence drop seizure. Clonic, those are the jerky movements, kind of like you'd picture in a big seizure, but often it's just one part of the body. Myoclonic's similar, but the jerks are super fast, like a spasm.
Okay, so those are more about sudden movement, while absence was more like dot blanking out. What about that last one, tonic?
Tonic is all about stiffness. So during that seizure, muscles tense up, they go rigid, might even fall stiffly.
So we've got zoning out, collapsing, jerking, stiffening. Way more than I ever knew. You said before how important diagnosis is, but with all this, it must be even more crucial.
You got it. If someone's having seizures, especially the subtle ones, getting it right is huge. Sadly, misdiagnosis happens, and that means delays in treatment, support, everything.
And I bet some people don't even know they're having them. Those quick ones, easy to brush off as something else.
All the time, that's why we're talking about it. The more we know about how seizures show UP, the better we can spot them, get help, all that.
So, brass tacks time. What's someone listening to this supposed to do? Parent, teacher, friend, what do they need to know?
Biggest thing, if you or someone you're close to is on the spectrum, remember, epilepsy is more likely. Doesn't mean it'll happen, but be aware.
Knowledge is power, right?
You know it. And if you see what you think is a seizure, don't play doctor. Stay calm, keep them safe, maybe cushion their head if they're falling, and if it's more than a minute or two or keeps happening, get medical help fast.
Solid advice. It's funny, we say awareness, but what does that even mean practically? Now, I actually feel like I've got a better idea, so thanks.
Happy to help. And that leads us to another big takeaway: treatment. Getting diagnosed early and getting the right treatment is key for both autism and epilepsy.
And the article pointed out treatment isn't just meds. There's this idea that epilepsy is purely medical, with a medical fix. But it's not that simple.
Nope, not at all. Medication is important for a lot of people, helps manage seizures, but it's not the whole story.
So what else is there? What are some of the other treatments the article talked about?
Well, for one, there's monitoring. Keeping track of the seizures, what triggers them, how often they happen. That's gold for doctors. Then there's safety stuff. Depending on the seizure type, someone might need precautions like helmets or changing their environment so they don't get hurt.
Right, it's not just about stopping the seizures, it's about the whole person living their best life. What about those behavioral therapies we talked about? How do those fit in, especially with medication and all?
Yeah, behavioral therapies like ABA therapy, which this website's all about, can be super helpful, especially with autism. They can work on communication, daily living skills, even things like anxiety or sleep, which seizures can make worse sometimes.
So it's that whole person approach, again,
Mm.
not just treating seizures in a vacuum.
Exactly. And that's even more important when you think about the social and emotional side of having both conditions.
You know, that's what I was thinking about. The article was great for the medical stuff, but it got me thinking about the social aspect too. Having to deal with both can't be easy.
You're telling me it's tough and people don't always get it. Imagine like a teenager with autism who loves concerts, right? Then they have a grand mal seizure right in the middle of a show, crowded, loud.
Oh man, that'd be awful for
No.
them and everyone there.
Exactly. And then think about afterwards, the embarrassment, maybe being scared to go back, even if they love music.
It shows how what one person thinks is no big deal can be life-changing for someone else, and how something like that could make someone afraid to even tell people about their epilepsy.
Exactly. That's why awareness is so important. And I don't just mean spotting seizures, it's about understanding, empathy. We need a world where people feel safe, saying, hey, this is part of me, and people are cool about it, not scared or judging.
A world where everyone feels seen no matter what.
Right. Couldn't put it better myself.
Well, this deep dive has been honestly eye-opening. We've gone from how common this link is to all the different seizures to treating the whole Pollock person.
And don't forget the social and emotional impact, which often gets overlooked. It's about understanding what it's truly like to live with both conditions.
So, listener, as you go about your day, think about this. We talked facts, but it's people's stories that matter. How can WA make a world where those with autism A and D epilepsy can truly thrive? Something to think about.